It was a Tuesday night when I came across the listing on Craigslist. I had just moved to a new city and was looking for some used furniture on the cheap. Money was tight, so I was eager to find some good deals. The listing that caught my eye advertised a whole living room, set for only $200. It seemed almost too good to be true. The listing didn't have much detail, just a brief description of the furniture and the price. No pictures or information about the seller, but $200 for a whole living room set. I had to check it out. I sent an email expressing my interest and asking if the furniture was still available. Within minutes, I received a reply. The sender introduced himself as John and said he was selling the furniture because he was moving suddenly. He said the furniture was in great condition and that he could deliver it for an extra $50. His eager reply made me somewhat skeptical, but I told myself not to judge too quickly. Lots of people have to make quick moves and need to sell things off cheaply. I agreed to meet John that same night to take a look at the furniture. He gave me an address on the outskirts of the city in an industrial area. Not exactly where I expected used furniture to be. But again, I didn't want to pass judgment prematurely. I pulled up to the address right on time, an old warehouse. The large loading door was rolled open halfway. Though the warehouse looked abandoned, several cars were parked outside. I got out of my car cautiously and peered inside the dimly lit warehouse. I could see various pieces of furniture lined up, looking to be in decent shape. "Hello," I called out. A figure appeared from the shadows and approached me. "You must be here about the furniture," the man said with a big smile that immediately put me at ease. "I'm John. We spoke over email. Come on and take a look." I followed John into the warehouse, which was full of various home furnishings. "As you can see, these are all quality pieces. I'm just looking to sell them quick before I move," he explained. "Go ahead and look around. Test everything out." As I inspected the sofas, tables, chairs, and wardrobes, I was impressed with what I saw. This furniture seemed to be practically brand new and of good quality. John said he was furnishing a whole new condo and no longer had room for these older pieces. I decided to take the whole living room set: a sofa, love seat, 2 end tables, and a coffee table. Only $250 delivered to my door. I couldn't believe the luck I'd finding this deal. We loaded up the furniture into John's truck and followed him back to my place. He carried everything inside for me. I was delighted to have such a nice living room set for so cheap. After John left, I inspected my new furniture closer. I noticed some scratches and stains on the coffee table that had been obscured in the dim lighting of the warehouse. Not a big deal, I thought. Normal wear and tear. I'd still gotten a fantastic deal. I was so exhausted from the day's errands that I went to bed early that night before I could clean or arrange any of my new furniture. As I was drifting off to sleep, I thought I heard a noise out in the living room. A scraping, scratching kind of noise. Probably just the house settling, I told myself, but I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling. The next morning, I woke up and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. Walking past the living room, I glanced at the furniture and stopped dead in my tracks. The coffee table was not up against the sofa where I had left it last night. It was pulled out at an angle, closer to the center of the room. My rational mind searched for logical explanations. Maybe the table wasn't as stable as I thought on the old wood floors. Maybe it slid out when I was moving other pieces around. But my gut knew something wasn't right. I searched the rest of the living room and noticed more subtle changes from the night before. The rug askew, a floor lamp tilted, end tables shifted slightly. It was as if someone had come in and sat on the couch, bumping things as they moved around. But that was impossible, right? I double-checked that the door was still locked and chained from the inside. I don't know why I suddenly felt the need to search under the furniture and in every closet and corner, but I found nothing amiss. No signs of forced entry or rummaging through my belongings. Yet I couldn't shake the creepy, crawling sensation that I was not alone here. At work that day, I couldn't focus. I kept glancing out the window at home, irrationally expecting to see a stranger lurking on my porch or peering in the window. I rushed home as early as I could, apprehensive about what I might find. The living room appeared undisturbed this time, but that night I barely slept. I lay rigidly still, ears straining for any odd noise. As exhausted as I felt, I resisted sleep out of fear of what might transpire while I was unconscious. Near dawn, I finally dozed off. I woke up late for work, having overslept in spite of my paranoia. Still, nothing appeared out of place. Was I losing my mind? Letting my imagination run wild? The next evening, I decided to set a trap. I carefully arranged my living room with everything at precise angles. I lined up books and knickknacks into specific patterns on the end tables. If someone came in here again, I would know by what was moved or altered. I rigged up a video camera on a tripod, pointed right at the couch and coffee table in case I caught footage of an intruder. Too anxious to sleep, I stayed up watching movie after movie. The living room remained still. No movement other than the shadows flickering across the walls from the television. In the middle of the night, fatigue finally overtook me. I left the TV on and slumped over on the couch, drifting into restless dreams. I awoke with a start to bright sunlight filling the room. Groggy and disoriented, I sat up scanning the living room. It took a moment for me to realize something was amiss. On the floor before the couch lay a small blood-stained knife, but the blood looked dried and old. Next to the knife sat my video camera, tilted over facing the wall instead of the center of the room. Had someone come in and moved it during the night? Or had I done it myself in a sleepy haze? A sinking dread crept over me as I forced myself to watch the video footage. The first few hours showed only the empty stillness of the living room at night. Suddenly, the camera view shifted wildly, then focused on the wall as if someone had grabbed it. After that, only the static wall, no movement. I felt nauseous and lightheaded. I had to get out of this place immediately. I went to start packing my things. As I entered the bedroom, a strange, foul stench assaulted my nose. In the corner, a large wardrobe I had bought from John Loom. The odor seemed to emanate from it. Though my legs could barely carry me, I forced myself forward. I slowly reached out a trembling hand toward the wardrobe handle. As I tugged it open, an avalanche of decay poured out. Swarms of roaches and flies swirled around the putrid remains of what had once been a living being. I collapsed to the floor, screaming uncontrollably. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, multiple police officers stood over me. Through my delirium, I barely made out what they were saying about remains being found and suspects being tracked down. As the ambulance took me away, I overheard something about a death many years ago, a wife that had gone missing. John must have used this furniture to conceal her decomposing body after committing unspeakable atrocities. I will never rid my mind of the horrors I witnessed in that innocent-looking living room, set from Craigslist. Never again will I take chances on sketchy deals and blindly welcome strangers into my home. This chilling experience will haunt me forever. I've never been one to scare easily. As a single woman living alone in the city, I've dealt with my fair share of creepy dudes trying to hit on me at bars or catcall me on the street. Annoying, yes, but not scary. At least that's what I always told myself. But then I started noticing strange things happening after I sold my old couch on Craigslist last month. Little things that made me question if I really was still safe living by myself. It started with a knock at my apartment door, late one weeknight. I peered through the peephole to see a tall man in a baseball cap standing there, looking around nervously. "Who is it?" I called out without opening the door. "I'm here about the couch," he replied, from Craigslist. I was confused since I had sold the couch over 2 weeks ago. When I told him so through the closed door, he started muttering angrily under his breath. I threatened to call the police and he finally left, his loud footsteps stomping down the hall. A few days later, I stepped out of the shower to find 2 missed calls from an unknown number. I didn't think much of it at first, but then over the next couple weeks, I received dozens more calls from unfamiliar numbers at all times of day and night. If I answered, only heavy breathing could be heard before they eventually hung up. At the same time, strange cars started parking along my street for days on end. My neighborhood was usually pretty quiet, so this sudden parade of unfamiliar vehicles definitely struck me as odd. One white van in particular gave me the creeps since I could never see the driver inside when I walked by. But things got truly scary when I started spotting a red pickup truck everywhere I went. At the gym, parked across from my office, idling on the street by my favorite coffee shop. That same truck just kept popping up wherever I was. It took me a few days to connect the dots, but this truck was definitely following me. The last straw came when I was heading out of my building's underground parking garage. As the exit gate lifted, headlights flooded my rearview mirror, blinding me for a second. It was the red pickup truck coming in right behind me. As I drove off, it tailed me for several blocks before I was able to lose it in traffic. I immediately pulled into a police station to file a report. Turns out the license plate number I had scribbled down matched a truck registered to a Thomas Healy. The officer told me they couldn't do much without evidence. He had threatened me directly, but they agreed to patrol around my block more often. When I got home, I searched online for any info about this Thomas Healy character. What I found made my blood turn cold. He had a long rap sheet for harassment and stalking, not to mention a few domestic assault charges against past partners. This was no harmless weirdo. This man was dangerous. I stopped going out alone after dark. My pepper spray went everywhere with me now. At home, I checked and rechecked the locks on my doors and windows constantly. I was jumpy all the time, imagining I was being watched whenever I went outside. I knew Thomas was still following me, even if I couldn't always spot his truck. He had fixated on me, for some reason after only that single encounter at my door. Just yesterday, I came out of a morning yoga class to find Thomas parked right next to my car, glaring at me through his grimy windshield. I jumped into my car and sped off, watching him follow me once again in my rearview mirror. He knows my schedule, my favorite places, my parking spot at home. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore. Today, I'm going to look for a new apartment across town. I'll break my lease, take time off work, do whatever I need to get away from this psycho. He can keep obsessively lurking around my already vacated apartment as long as he wants. But I will not let this Craigslist creep stalk me any longer. This ends today. I don't know why I ever thought replying to that Craigslist ad was a good idea. The ad was simple enough, looking to buy used furniture ASAP cash payment. Text preferred. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but money had been tight lately, and I was eager to get some extra cash for an old couch I no longer needed. Against my better judgment, I texted the number listed. A few minutes later, I got a reply from someone named Jeff. He said he was interested in the couch and could come take a look that evening. He seemed friendly enough in his messages, if a bit eager. I tentatively agreed to have him come over around 8 p.m. when my roommate would be home too. When 8 o'clock rolled around, there was a knock at the door right on time. I opened it to find a gruff-looking man who appeared to be in his 40s. He introduced himself as Jeff and I invited him in. As we walked to the living room to look at the couch, I yelled to my roommate that our visitor had arrived. Jeff seemed annoyed when he realized we weren't alone in the apartment. Nonetheless, he began examining the couch, running his hands along the fabric and pushing down on the cushions. After a few minutes, he said, "Yeah, this looks good. I'll give you $50 for it." I was a bit surprised by the low offer considering the couch was in great condition, but I agreed since I just wanted it gone. Jeff started digging around in his pockets, eventually pulling out a wad of cash. He peeled off 2 20s and 10 and handed them to me. Just as the exchange was completed, We heard the apartment door swing open. My roommate had left to take out the trash and was just getting back. Jeff shuffled his feet nervously and suggested he start taking the couch downstairs to his truck. Together, we carried the bulky couch out of the apartment into the parking lot. Jeff's truck was an old, beat-up pickup. The beige paint was faded and peeling, and the bed was littered with tools and trash. As we loaded up the couch, an uneasy feeling started brewing in my gut. Things just seemed a little off about the whole situation. Once the couch was strapped down in the back of the truck, Jeff turned to me and said, "Hey, I've got another piece of furniture I'm interested in if you've got time to show me." Every instinct told me to say no, but he was still holding the wad of cash from earlier, so I reluctantly agreed to come take a look. I told him I would follow behind in my car as he drove. Jeff got in his truck and pulled out of the parking lot with me trailing behind. I followed him for at least 15 minutes until we turned down a dirt road on the outskirts of town. My uneasiness grew stronger. We were now in a remote area with no houses or businesses around. After a few more twists and turns down increasingly narrow roads, Jeff pulled his truck off to the side in a small clearing. I stopped my car about 20 feet behind him and waited to see what he would do next. After a minute, Jeff got out of his truck and started walking back towards me, still clutching the roll of cash in his hand. He came up to my window and said there was something in the bed of his truck he wanted to show me. I told him I would just follow him back out from here, but he insisted I come take a look. He seemed friendly enough, but everything about this felt wrong. I knew I needed to get out of there. So I politely declined, rolled up my window, and turned the car around to head back the way we came. Looking back in my rearview mirror, I saw Jeff growing smaller and smaller as I drove away. I made it about 100 yards down the dirt road before my car suddenly sputtered to a stop. I had barely driven this old Corolla since getting it, so it must have decided that tonight was the perfect time to break down. I cursed myself for not getting the engine looked at. I pumped the gas pedal, desperately cranking the ignition, but it was no use. The car was dead. I looked back and could see Jeff leaning against his truck nearby. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out what to do next. I had left my phone back at the apartment like an idiot. I contemplated making a run for it, but there was no civilization for miles, and the truck would surely be able to catch me. As I sat there frozen in fear, I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Jeff was headed my way. I sunk down lower in my seat, wishing I could just disappear. Soon, his imposing figure came into view in my driver's side window. "Everything okay?" he asked with a concerned tone that I knew was fake. "Looks like you're having some car trouble. Want me to take a look?" I cautiously cracked the window an inch or two, telling him I already called for a tow truck that would be here soon. Jeff scratched his stubble and suggested waiting together in his truck, but I assured him help was coming and I'd be fine. Eventually, he seemed to give up his nice guy act, leaning in close to the window with a serious look in his eyes. "Now listen here, Missy," he growled under his breath. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, you're coming with me." A cold chill ran through my body, hearing the malice in his voice. Without thinking, I grabbed the steering wheel and let out 3 long honks of the horn, breaking the eerie silence. Startled, Jeff stepped back from the car. I then reached down for my purse on the passenger floor, fumbling around loudly until my hand grasped the cool metal object I'd been looking for, a small handgun. I had bought it for safety after moving to the city, but up until now had never used it. I pulled the gun from my purse and shakily aimed it out the driver's side window at Jeff. "Get back now!" I shouted, my voice trembling. Jeff's confident demeanor quickly melted away. He may have been big and intimidating, but nothing is scarier than staring down the barrel of a gun. He slowly started backing away with his hands up, as I kept the weapon trained on him. Once he was about 20 feet away, I told him to turn around and get on his knees. With the roles now reversed, I cautiously got out of the car, keeping my pistol aimed at Jeff's back. As I inched closer, I could hear him mumbling pleas under his breath. I picked up a long piece of rope from the truck bed and used it to tie Jeff's hands tightly behind his back. For good measure, I also bound his ankles. Leaving him restrained in the dirt, I hurried back to my car and was able to get it started again after a few tries. As I drove off, I could see Jeff still squirming around in my rearview mirror before he eventually disappeared from sight. I shuddered, thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't pulled out that gun, but pushed the thought quickly from my mind. All that mattered now was getting home safely. I arrived back at the apartment, exhausted and still a bit shaken a couple hours later. My hands trembled as I recounted the story to my wide-eyed roommate, who urged me to call the police right away. I agreed, and soon a patrol car arrived to get my statement. I told them every detail about the encounter and gave a description of Jeff. In the following days, I worried whether he had gotten free and might try to find me. But as time went on with no sign of him, I gradually began to feel safe again. However, I never posted on Craigslist again. And anytime I'm selling something online now, I always make sure to meet in a crowded public place, never again at my home. That terrifying ordeal was a wake-up call to be more careful when dealing with strangers. I learned the hard way that you never really know who is on the other end of that online ad. I'm just grateful I made it out unharmed with a chilling story to tell. But it's not one I ever want to experience again. I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this when I first decided to post that ad on Craigslist. I was just looking to make a little extra cash to help cover my rent that month. My job waiting tables just wasn't cutting it, and I was desperate. So I posted an ad offering my services as a house cleaner. $20 hours, flexible hours, references available upon request. The email came a few days later from a woman named Sarah, who said she had a large house that needed cleaning at least twice a week. She was willing to pay my rate and said she didn't need any references. I was a little surprised that she didn't even want to meet me first, but I figured she was just really busy. We arranged for me to come to her house that Friday to get started. Sarah lived way out in the middle of nowhere, down a long, winding dirt road that didn't even show up on my GPS. The house itself was huge and ominous looking, like something straight out of a gothic horror novel. My unease grew as I walked up to ring the bell. Something felt off about the whole situation, but I tried to shake it off. I needed the money badly enough to ignore my instincts. Sarah answered the door, but barely looked at me as she ushered me inside. She was young, maybe early 30s, but had a sort of vacant look in her eyes, like her mind was somewhere far away. She gestured vaguely towards the kitchen and told me to get started, and she'd be downstairs if I needed anything. I tried to make conversation as I worked, calling out cheerful greetings into the cavernous house, but my voice echoed unanswered through the halls. There were no signs of anyone actually living there. No clutter, no personal items, not even any dirt or dust that would require cleaning. The whole place had an abandoned, tomb-like feel that made me increasingly unsettled. After a few hours, I had finished the main floor and decided to take a break before tackling the upstairs. I wandered through the long hallways, looking for the door to the basement to let Sarah know I was almost done for the day. Behind one door, I discovered a staircase leading down into inky darkness. I called Sarah's name tentatively. No response came back, so I began to descend the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the cold cement wall to steady myself. The basement was pitch black. It took my eyes a minute to adjust before I could make out vague shapes. What looked like a workbench along one wall and a large metal pole in the center of the room. As I crept closer, straining to see through the gloom, I bumped into something that swung away from me. I reached out reflexively to stop the object from swaying, and my hands met with cold flesh. I stumbled back, suppressing a scream when I realized it was a human body hanging from a rope. Panicked, I fumbled for a light switch on the wall, flipped it on, and almost fainted at the sight before me. There were bodies hanging from poles all around the room in various stages of decay. Men, women, even a few children, all with their throats slit. In the corner was a stained mattress on the floor with leather straps attached to rusty bed frames on either side. And there, in the center of the room, spattered with blood, was a stainless steel table, clearly meant for dissecting human bodies. I clasped my hand over my mouth to keep from vomiting and slowly started to back towards the stairs, praying that Sarah was not down here. My heart pounding in my ears was the only sound until I felt something grab my ankle from under the workbench. A low moan came from beneath, and a man's bloody face and hands emerged from the darkness, grasping at my legs desperately. I screamed then and ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, tires spitting up gravel as I tore back down that long dirt road. My hands shook on the wheel as I drove, not stopping until I reached my apartment, 45 minutes away. I locked the door behind me and pushed a dresser in front of it, collapsing on my bed in tears. The police didn't believe me at first when I told them what I had seen at Sarah's house. They said no one lived at that address in the county records, but they agreed to drive out and take a look, with me following cautiously behind in my own car. Where the house had been, there was nothing but an empty field. No sign anything had ever been there at all. The investigators said it must have been a prank. Kids making up a haunted house to scare me, but I know what I saw, and I never used Craigslist again.